Welcome to the first video in this new series focusing on the functions and structures of the human respiratory system. In this introductory video, we're going to look at the three primary functions of the respiratory system, as well as take a look at the first structures that air passes through upon entering the human body. So if we look at these two individuals here, it's very likely that the two are inhaling air, and specifically when we refer to inhaling air, the primary gas that we are looking for is oxygen gas, as this is the gas that is required for cellular respiration in order to produce energy. The scientific word that refers to the process of inhaling oxygen is what we call the process of inspiration, which again is the same spelling as the word inspiration for to get a good idea, but in this case it refers to the transfer of air into the human respiratory system. Now, once inhalation is done, the logical second process is to exhale, only it's not oxygen gas that humans are looking to exhale, it's carbon dioxide, and this of course is the waste product of cellular respiration that our body needs to remove in order for this product becoming toxic through a series of chemical reactions in the human body. So naturally, the process of exhaling CO2 is what we call the process of expiration, which again is indeed the noun form of the verb to expire, meaning to end, but in this context it refers to the process of releasing air from the human body. Now, the third, and perhaps one of the more neglected functions of the respiratory system, is to change the conditions of air in order to make it more usable by the human body. So the first way that air is conditioned is in the form of improving its cleanliness. Now, common sense dictates that not 100% of all of the substances in air are completely clean. For example, pollution. And when your respiratory system conditions the air, improving its cleanliness, its job is to remove any harmful substances, particularly harmful particles that are larger than gas molecules, and preventing them from accumulating inside of the lungs. Now, once the air itself has been filtered and cleaned, and we'll talk about how that happens in a second, there are two environmental conditions that need to be changed. The first of which is temperature, and this is particularly important during the winter because generally the atmospheric temperature in wintertime is going to be much colder than inside of the human body, but this also applies to summer temperatures, and especially for humans that live in environments that are warmer than body temperature. And so the respiratory system's job is to adjust the air temperature to approximately 37 degrees Celsius in order to be the same as human body temperature. The second condition that needs to be altered is humidity, which is simply adjusting the amount of moisture or the amount of water that is dissolved within air. Now, if the humidity level is too high, you can actually get the accumulation of water inside of the lungs, and if this is extreme, a person can actually drown. But if the air is too dry, the oxygen that we want to get into your blood doesn't dissolve very well, and so maintaining the right amount of humidity that air has once it gets into your lungs is one of the functions of the respiratory system. And in this video, we're going to mainly focus on how the introductory structures of the respiratory system maintain cleanliness of the air, starting with the nasal cavity, which is the space right in here behind your nose. So if we follow the process of inhalation, air we know is going to be inhaled through your nostrils, which are the two holes in your nose that lead inside of the nasal cavity. Now, most people understand that inhaling through your nose is much healthier than inhaling through your mouth, and there's a very simple reason why. Inside of the nasal cavity, you actually have nose hairs, or more correctly known as nasal hairs, which grow off of the skin inside of your nasal cavity like this. And these are very simply provide a natural physical barrier. For example, one example of something that we do not want entering the respiratory system are pathogens such as bacteria or viruses, and therefore the nose hairs actually represent a physical barrier that obstructs the opening of the nasal cavity and prevents large particles from entering the nasal cavity. Now, in the event where particles can actually get past the nose hairs, the inside of your nasal cavity also has a layer of mucus on the skin inside like this. And again, you can actually feel this mucus if you take your favorite finger and stick it up your favorite nostril. Most people will find that the inside of their nasal cavity is quite sticky. And so if we follow this bacterium, if it somehow manages to get into the nasal cavity, the next thing that will most likely happen to this pathogenic bacterium is that it's going to get stuck in the mucus. So mucus exists to trap any substances that get past the nose hairs and get them stuck before they can reach the opening of the throat. And also the mucus will ultimately help to remove whatever this foreign particle is going to be, and we can see that this lady here is going to be removing any of the contaminated mucus inside of her nasal cavity, because of course it looks like she is going to sneeze. If you prefer not sneezing, you can also use a tissue to blow your nose, or if you prefer a more hands-on approach, literally, you can take your favorite finger and stick it up your favorite nostril and clean out the mucus yourself. Just remember to wash your hands before or after doing this. Fun fact, the scientific word for the word sneeze is the process of sternutation. So the scientific word for the verb to sneeze is to sternutate. You can use this in English class the next time you want to show off. Now, let's pursue the hypothetical that the pathogenic bacterium that follows actually manages to get past the nose hairs and the mucus of the nasal cavity and actually manages to get inside of your throat. So if we look inside of what most people call your windpipe here, this perspective here is if you remove your head and look straight down into the throat like this, this is looking down into your windpipe, which is what we call your trachea. And inside of your trachea, even if a pathogenic bacterium or other particles get into your trachea, fear not, because the inside of your trachea also contains a mucus layer that exists to trap debris or any harmful particles that make it past your nasal cavity. So here we can see that our pathogenic bacterium is still frustrated because it's caught inside of the mucus. Now, at this point, you can either use one of two ways in order to get this contaminated mucus out of your trachea. You can either use the muscles inside of your trachea to actually cough up this mucus and bring it up to the opening of your mouth. If you've ever heard someone clearing their throat with a deep cough, like that, what they're doing is they are actually pushing the mucus all the way up to the top of the trachea, where you can either spit it out of your mouth, which is probably the smarter solution, or because your esophagus is also found at the back of the mouth, this actually here is the esophagus. When you actually push the contaminated mucus back up to your mouth, you can actually swallow it down the esophagus, and eventually it will make it down to the stomach, and the acid in your stomach will dispose of any pathogens that are trapped in the mucus, killing them and rendering them harmless. Now, if you have a great need of the inside of your throat being stable, for example, if you're a singer, clearing your throat like that is not very good for the voice, and so the mucus actually can be pushed up naturally, because on the inside of the trachea are little hair-like structures. They're actually microscopic. You can't see them, but they are made of similar proteins to hair, and they are what we call cilia. So these little tendrils here that I've drawn are microscopic cilia that actually move kind of like the way a helicopter blade moves by spinning, and the motion of the cilia will actually push the mucus back up to the top of the mouth so that the mucus can get to the opening of your mouth where you can swallow it down your esophagus or spit it out of your body, whichever you prefer. Now, the other structurally important feature of the trachea is that the trachea is actually quite rigid, and if you take fingers and press on where your throat is, eventually when you find your trachea, which is actually in front of the esophagus, you can feel the trachea at the front of your neck. You will feel that it is actually quite hard, although not quite as hard as bone, because it's actually made of a protein-based structure called cartilage, which is the same structure that your nose and your ears are made of. And the reason for this is relatively simple. It needs to stay rigid so that it maintains an open airway and allows the free flow of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And if it were not rigid, it would be able to fold in on itself and collapse, and your airway would be obstructed and you wouldn't be able to breathe. But at the same time, the trachea also needs to be able to relax in the event where you actually need more air to travel down into your lungs. The trachea can actually expand and contract depending on the situation, and cartilage ensures that it has the flexibility to do so while having the rigidity to make sure that it stays open and doesn't collapse, causing you to asphyxiate. In the next part of this video series, we're going to look past the trachea and look at the inner structures of the respiratory system, including the tubing that is found in the lungs, and follow the journey of oxygen as it makes it all the way into the lungs, and look at how oxygen is ultimately transferred into your blood.